It was a warm evening, the kind of night when the air feels heavy and slow. The roads outside the city were quiet, the hum of crickets the only sound between the long stretches of fields. A silver sedan rolled down the highway, its headlights slicing through the darkness. Behind the wheel was a woman in her mid-30s named Alicia Monroe. She looked calm, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but inside she was tired. Tired in the way only someone who had seen too much could be. Alicia worked as a federal agent. For the past few weeks, she had been on an undercover mission in another state, posing as someone she wasn't. The work had been stressful, full of long nights and careful lies. Now that the case was over, all she wanted was a shower, a good night's sleep, and a few quiet days before her next assignment. She was driving home in her regular clothes, a plain blue dress and a light jacket. Her FBI badge and service weapon were locked away in her purse on the passenger seat. She kept her speed steady, staying just under the limit. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lined by trees that bent toward the asphalt like silent watchers. The last bit of sunlight had faded away, leaving only the occasional flash of another car's headlights far in the distance. It felt peaceful, until she saw the red and blue lights behind her. At first, Alicia thought maybe the officer was passing through on an emergency call. But when the flashing lights didn't fade and instead drew closer, she realized the patrol car was signaling for her to pull over. Her eyebrows knit together in mild confusion. She hadn't been speeding. She wasn't swerving or breaking any laws. Still, she eased the car toward the side of the road and brought it to a stop, as any careful driver would. She reached for her purse, intending to have her driver's license ready. That's when she noticed the officer's car hadn't stopped at a normal distance. It rolled up almost to her bumper, lights still spinning. The door opened hard and a tall man in uniform stepped out. Even from her mirror, she could tell something about his walk was off. It wasn't routine or calm. It was heavy, impatient, as if he already believed something bad before he even spoke. Alicia rolled down her window halfway and rested her hands visibly on the steering wheel. That was standard practice, something drilled into every agent during training. Always make your hands visible during any police encounter. The officer approached, flashlight in hand, shining the beam directly into her face. "Evening, officer," Alicia said politely, keeping her tone steady. "Is there a problem?" The man didn't answer right away. His flashlight hovered over her face, down to her chest, then to the back seat. His jaw tightened. "License and registration," he said finally, voice sharp and commanding. "Of course," she replied. She reached slowly for her purse. "I'm going to get my wallet. My ID is inside." He stepped closer to the door. "I didn't ask for commentary." "Just do as you're told." Alicia paused for half a second. Something in his tone carried hostility. Not the kind that came from a long day, but something deeper, a bias that didn't need words. Still, she kept her expression calm. "All right, officer." She handed over her license and registration once she retrieved them. He took them, glancing briefly before looking back at her. "Where are you headed?" "Home," she said. "Just finished work. Where's home?" "Washington." The officer's brow rose slightly. "That's a long way from here. You in some kind of hurry?" "No, sir." He leaned against the car now, arms folded. "You sure about that? You were going over the limit a minute ago." "I don't believe I was," Alicia answered, still calm. "My cruise control's set right at 55. He gave a humorless chuckle. "So now you're calling me a liar?" "Not at all," she said softly. "Just saying what I know." The silence between them grew thick. Alicia noticed how his eyes kept narrowing, scanning her car like he was searching for a reason to justify his anger. He looked at her dress, her skin, her out-of-state plates, and she could feel the judgment forming in his mind. "Step out of the car," he said suddenly. Alicia blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." "Step out," she hesitated. "Officer, may I ask the reason for this stop?" He took a step closer. "You're resisting orders now?" "No," she replied, steady as ever. "I just want to understand what this is about." His hand went to his holster, resting on the weapon. "Out now." Alicia knew that tone. She'd heard it before, during arrests, interrogations, and raids. It was the voice of someone who believed power gave them control over others. Her heart beat a little faster, but her mind stayed focused. She slowly opened the door, keeping her movements measured and non-threatening. The air outside was still warm, but the tension made it feel colder. The officer walked around her car, his flashlight scanning again. "Pop the trunk," he ordered. There's nothing in it except luggage, she said. I said, pop the trunk. She reached for the latch. The trunk lifted open with a soft click. He shone his light inside, rummaging through her bags with one hand while keeping the other near his weapon. What do you do for a living? He asked suddenly. I work in federal service, she replied. His eyes flicked toward her. Federal service, huh? Like what, the post office? Something like that, she said, deciding not to reveal her real job. Experience had taught her that some situations got worse when people in authority felt challenged. He grunted and kept looking. People like you think you can come through here and do whatever you want. You think you're better than us? Alicia didn't respond. She stood by the hood of her car, hands folded in front of her, her face calm. Years of FBI work had taught her how to mask emotion, but inside she could feel frustration building. Not fear, just the tired, familiar anger of being treated unfairly without reason. The sound of another vehicle passed by on the opposite lane, its headlights briefly lighting the scene. For a second, she wondered if the driver noticed how tense everything looked. Finally, the officer slammed her trunk shut. I'm going to need to check your car interior, he said. Am I being detained? She asked evenly. Don't play lawyer with me, he snapped. I'll tell you when you can go. Alicia exhaled slowly. She had handled criminals twice his size and more dangerous than him. But this was different. This wasn't a criminal act. It was an abuse of authority. The kind that was harder to fight because it hid behind a badge. He opened her passenger door without asking and looked inside. His flashlight hit her purse lying open on the seat. For a second, she worried he'd see the edge of her badge or the corner of her gun holster inside. She turned slightly, hoping to block his view, but he was already reaching toward it. Sir, she said, her voice still calm. That's my personal bag. Yeah? He said, not looking at her. Then you shouldn't have left it open. His hand brushed near the badge inside, and she knew she had to distract him before he noticed it. Officer, she said quickly, if there's an issue with my paperwork, I'm happy to clear it up at the station. He stopped for a second, his suspicion returning. You seem awful confident for someone getting pulled over. I just believe in following the process, she said, managing a small, polite smile. That seemed to throw him off a little. He stared at her for a moment, his flashlight dropping slightly. Then, almost out of nowhere, he said, Wait here, and walked back to his patrol car with her license still in hand. As soon as he turned away, Alicia let out the breath she'd been holding. She glanced at the distant highway lights and wondered how far the next gas station or rest stop was. Her mind ran through her options. She could call local dispatch, but that might make things worse if his friends were on shift. Or she could contact her field supervisor, but that would expose her cover and possibly make the situation public. A few minutes passed. The officer sat in his car talking on the radio. Alicia couldn't hear the words, but his tone was impatient, clipped. She adjusted her jacket, trying to shake off the tension. Her thoughts drifted briefly to home, to her apartment, the city lights, the peace of being somewhere safe. When he finally stepped out again, she straightened. The light still flashed behind him, painting the quiet road in streaks of red and blue. He didn't look calmer. If anything, he looked angrier. He walked back to her with long strides, his face hard. Get your hands on the hood, he said abruptly. Alicia frowned. Officer, why? You fit the description of someone we're looking for, he said quickly, as if making it up on the spot. What description? She asked. Don't question me. Do it now. She stood still for a moment. Every instinct told her this wasn't about any description. It was about power. She was tempted to show her badge right there, to end it instantly. But part of her training told her to wait. Timing mattered. The wrong move could make things worse, especially in the dark on an empty road. So she placed her hands gently on the hood, eyes forward. Inside, her mind stayed sharp. Whatever came next, she'd be ready. And as the night deepened around them, the soft hum of crickets was replaced by the growing tension of something far more serious, something that neither of them yet understood would soon change both their lives forever. The night air felt colder now. The sound of crickets and the faraway hum of a passing truck were the only things breaking the silence. Alicia stood beside her car with her hands resting on the hood. The metal was warm from the engine, but she felt a chill run through her body. It wasn't fear. She wasn't the type to panic, but she could sense the situation slipping into something that didn't feel right. The officer behind her paced slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel on the roadside. He hadn't explained anything. He hadn't said why he was keeping her there. She could hear him breathing, steady and rough, like someone trying to hold on to their anger but not doing a very good job at it. "Stay right there," he said. His tone wasn't calm. It was sharp, almost like he was warning her of something. Alicia didn't move. "I'm not moving," she replied softly. He came closer, flashlight still in his hand. The light bounced off her car window and hit the side of her face. "You think you're smarter than me?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "Don't act innocent," he said, taking a step closer. "You've got that attitude. The kind that says you think you can talk your way out of anything." Alicia kept her voice even. "I didn't mean to sound that way. I just wanted to understand what's happening." He circled around her slowly, his shoes scraping against the gravel. "You people are always the same," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for her to hear. Alicia caught the words, but she didn't react. Years of training had taught her how to stay calm in tense situations. Inside, though, her patience was thinning. She had dealt with gang leaders, corrupt officials, and undercover operations where her life had been at risk. But standing there on a quiet highway, being treated like a suspect for no reason, felt like a different kind of danger. She took a small breath. "Officer, if I did something wrong, I'd like to make it right. But if I haven't, I'd appreciate being allowed to go." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me how to do my job." "I'm not," she said calmly. "I just don't understand what this stop is about." He turned abruptly and walked back toward his car. She watched him go, his posture stiff and tense. For a moment, she hoped he was going to run her license again, maybe realize his mistake and let her leave. But then she saw him pick up his radio. He was talking to someone, glancing back at her car as he spoke. Alicia's instincts kicked in. Something told her this wasn't a routine call. Maybe he was asking for backup. Maybe he was trying to come up with a reason to justify keeping her there. Either way, she needed to stay alert. The minutes dragged by. The road stayed quiet, the night darker now. Her phone sat inside her purse out of reach, but she didn't dare move for it. Any sudden movement might be taken the wrong way. She stood still, her hands still resting on the hood, feeling every second stretch longer than the one before it. Finally, the officer returned. "You can turn around," he said. She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. His expression was unreadable, part frustration, part pride. "I'm going to ask you a few more questions," he said, "and I suggest you answer honestly." "Of course," she replied. He stepped closer again. "You said you work for the federal government?" "Yes. What exactly do you do?" "I'm in investigations." He let out a short, mocking laugh. "Investigations? That's a big word. What kind of investigations?" "Mostly administrative," she said, keeping her tone neutral. She didn't want to lie, but she couldn't reveal she was an FBI agent. "Not yet," he crossed his arms. "You got proof of that?" "I have my work ID in my purse," she said. He looked at her car, then back at her. "Show me." She nodded slowly. "It's in the front seat." "I can reach in and grab it if that's all right." He hesitated, then gave a short nod. "Do it slow." Alicia walked to the passenger side, opened the door carefully, and leaned in to get her purse. Her fingers brushed against her badge. For a moment, she thought about taking it out, ending the game right there. But she decided against it. Something about his attitude told her he wouldn't take it well. It was better to wait until she had full control of the situation. She pulled out her wallet and handed over a folded government ID. He took it, looked at it briefly under the flashlight, and frowned. "No badge?" "It's not a badge position," she said smoothly. He seemed unsatisfied. "You must think you're pretty clever." "I just answered your question, sir." He glared at her for a few seconds before handing the ID back. "You can't fool me. I've seen all kinds out here. Fancy talk, fake documents, fake names. Doesn't mean anything." Alicia tucked her ID away, saying nothing. Silence filled the space between them again, thick and uncomfortable. He shifted on his feet. "Tell me what's really in that bag," he said suddenly, pointing at her purse. "Just personal items. Open it." She sighed quietly. "Officer, with all due respect, I'd rather you tell me why I was stopped first." That seemed to push him over the edge. "You don't give the orders here," he snapped. His voice rose sharply, echoing down the empty road. "You do what I tell you." Alicia stayed calm, even as his anger grew louder. "I'm not refusing," she said. "I'm asking for clarity." But he wasn't listening anymore. His jaw tightened as he pointed his flashlight toward her again. "You think you can talk circles around me? You think you're above the law?" "No, sir," she said firmly. "I think the law applies to everyone." For a brief moment, their eyes locked. It wasn't just a stare, it was a clash of two worlds. One built on authority, the other on discipline and integrity. The officer stepped back, breathing hard. He looked toward his car again, as if deciding what to do next. The radio on his shoulder crackled, and a voice came through faintly. He responded quickly, his tone low and curt. Alicia couldn't make out the words, but she caught the last part. "Yeah, she's still here." He turned back to her. "You stay right there. I'm waiting on confirmation." "Confirmation for what?" she asked, but he ignored her. Minutes passed. The sky above them had gone fully dark now, the moon half hidden behind thin clouds. Insects buzzed near the roadside lights, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Everything felt still except for the flicker of his patrol car's lights washing over the trees. Alicia shifted slightly to ease her legs, which had started to ache from standing so long. Her training had taught her patience, but this kind of waiting, unfair, unexplained, tested even her limits. At last, the officer walked back again, muttering something under his breath. "Nothing came back," he said finally. "You sure that ID's real?" "It's real," she said simply. He stared at her for a long time, as if trying to read something in her face. Then he leaned slightly closer, his tone low. "I know your type. Always calm, always polite, acting like you're better than everyone else." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," she said. He smirked. "We'll see about that." Then, to her surprise, he turned off his flashlight. The sudden darkness made everything feel heavier. Only the flashing lights from his patrol car lit the road now. Alicia felt her pulse quicken. Something about the way he was standing told her this wasn't just about suspicion anymore. It was about ego. She took a slow breath. "Officer, may I sit back in my car while you finish whatever you're checking? I've been standing here a long time." "No," he said flatly. "You stay where you are." She nodded, trying not to show the frustration that burned quietly beneath her calm expression. Another few minutes crawled by before he finally spoke again. "You can get back in your car," he said suddenly. "But don't go anywhere until I tell you." She didn't argue. She opened her door and sat inside, closing it gently behind her. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the tension of holding so much emotion in for so long. She glanced at the rearview mirror. The officer was still standing behind his car, talking into his radio again. His gestures were sharp, his shoulders stiff. Alicia reached into her purse and quietly took out her phone. She didn't call anyone, just unlocked it and opened her recording app. If things continued down this path, she needed to have some kind of record. She placed the phone face down on her lap, still recording. The soft glow of the screen faded, leaving her once again surrounded by darkness and flashing light. Time moved slowly. The officer didn't come back right away. She sat still, breathing deeply, trying to keep her mind clear. A part of her wanted to drive off, to leave the situation behind. But she couldn't. That would only make things worse. Finally, she saw him move toward her car again. He stopped at her window, tapping on the glass. She lowered it halfway. "Step out again," he said. Her heart sank a little. "Is something wrong?" "Just do it." Alicia took one last deep breath, unbuckled her seatbelt, and opened the door. She stepped out slowly, looking at him calmly, even though she could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. He stood there, eyes hard, jaw clenched. Whatever was going through his mind, it wasn't professionalism. It was personal now. Something about her had gotten under his skin. And though she didn't know it yet, the next few moments would test everything she'd learned about patience, courage, and control, because this wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. It was about something deeper. Something that was about to push both of them far past the point of no return. The night was still and heavy, the kind of stillness that made even small sounds seem loud. The breeze carried the faint smell of dust and dry grass. Alicia stood beside her car again, the flashing red and blue lights painting her face in shifting colors. She was calm on the outside, but inside her chest her heart beat harder than before. Something about this stop had gone far beyond normal. The officer stood only a few feet away, his flashlight back in his hand, his jaw tight. He didn't speak for a moment. He just watched her, as though trying to decide his next move. Alicia waited quietly, her hands relaxed by her sides, careful not to make any motion that could be misunderstood. "I told you to step out for a reason," he said finally, his voice low but sharp. "I did," she answered evenly. "You asked me to step out and I did. Now I'd like to know what happens next." His eyes narrowed. "You really don't know when to stop talking, do you?" "I'm just asking a question, officer. I've been patient." He took a slow breath and looked away, pacing for a moment as if thinking. Then he stopped, turned back toward her and said, "You said you work for the government. You got any proof that's real?" Alicia hesitated. She could easily end this with one move, reveal her badge, identify herself, and call it in. But years of fieldwork had taught her that sometimes the truth needed the right timing. She needed him to show his behavior clearly, especially if this incident ever reached an investigation. For now, she kept her words careful. "I already showed you my ID," she said calmly. "That's the proof I have," he frowned. "Doesn't look official to me." "It's issued by the department," she said simply. He stepped closer again. "You think that piece of paper makes you special?" "No, sir," she replied. "It's just who I am." He stared at her for a long second before saying, "You know, most people I pull over aren't this calm. You act like you've done this before." "I've worked with law enforcement before," she said, choosing her words with care. "I understand the process." "Yeah?" he said with a cold smirk. "Then you should know better than to question me." She didn't respond. Silence was sometimes more powerful than words. He started walking around her car again, shining his light through the windows. The beam moved across the seats, the dashboard, the floor. Every now and then, he'd stop and peer closer as if looking for something that wasn't there. "Nothing illegal in here?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. He nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. "We'll see." He pulled out his radio again, speaking into it quietly. Alicia couldn't make out the words this time, but she saw him glance at her car plates. He stayed that way for a minute, then returned with a blank look. "Your record's clean," he said finally. "That's interesting." "I told you," she said softly. He tilted his head slightly. "You don't sound nervous." "I have no reason to be," she answered. He stepped closer again, his eyes fixed on her face. "You know, sometimes people hide what they really are behind polite words." "I can see through that," she gave a small, tired sigh. "Officer, I've done everything you asked. I gave you my ID, my registration, my full cooperation. If you'd just tell me the reason for the stop, I'd be glad to address it." He stared at her, silent for a moment. Then his voice dropped lower. "You don't like being told what to do, do you?" "It's not that," she said carefully. "I just like fairness." That word, fairness, seemed to strike something in him. His expression hardened again. "Fairness?" he repeated. "You think you know what that means out here?" She didn't reply. There was no point. The radio on his shoulder crackled again. He pressed the button and responded quickly, his tone short. After a few seconds, he turned back to her. "You're free to go," he said suddenly. The words caught her off guard. "I can go?" "Yeah," he said, his voice flat. "Just watch your speed," she nodded slowly. "Thank you, officer." But as she turned to open her car door, she noticed something in his tone, a kind of forced calm, like someone pretending to be finished when they weren't. Her instincts told her it wasn't over. She got in, started the engine, and waited for a second before shifting to drive. The officer hadn't moved. He was still standing near the back of her car, staring. She rolled down the window slightly. "Is there something else, officer?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You just be careful driving through this town. Not everyone's as patient as I am." The words were coded in warning. She understood what he meant. Still, she gave a polite nod. "I appreciate the advice." She drove off slowly, watching in the mirror as his patrol car stayed in place, lights still flashing. The road ahead was quiet again, but the calm she'd felt before was gone. For several miles, she kept her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the dark highway. Every shadow seemed deeper now, every movement in the trees sharper. Her mind replayed the encounter, every word, every tone, every pause. She had dealt with aggressive suspects before, but this felt different. This wasn't a criminal with something to lose. This was someone in authority, acting out of bias and ego. And she knew it wasn't just her experience that told her so. It was instinct. After about 10 minutes, she realized headlights appeared behind her again. Bright, strong, and too familiar. Her chest tightened. She glanced at the mirror and saw the same pattern of red and blue flickering faintly. It was him again. She slowed slightly, hoping maybe he'd pass. Maybe it was coincidence. But the lights grew closer. Then the siren sounded, a quick burst, sharp and short. Her stomach sank. She pulled over again, her breath steady but her mind alert. The officer's car stopped right behind her, closer than before. This time, she didn't reach for anything. She kept both hands on the wheel, waiting. He approached again, slower now, as if measuring every step. "You know why I stopped you again?" he asked. "No," she said quietly. "You were swerving," he said. "I wasn't," she replied, her tone calm but firm. He gave a short laugh. "You sure you want to argue about it?" "I'm not arguing," she said. "Just stating the truth." He leaned closer to her window, eyes cold. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" She looked at him steadily. "Officer, I'm following every instruction. If you'd like to issue a ticket, I'll take it. But I won't admit to something I didn't do." That only seemed to frustrate him more. He took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "Get out of the car again," he ordered. She hesitated. "I've already complied once." "Why again?" "Because I said so," he snapped. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded and stepped out, her movements slow and deliberate. He motioned toward the front of her car. "Hands on the hood again." She obeyed, standing quietly as he circled her car once more. Her heart beat steadily, but not from fear, from the weight of knowing this was about to escalate again. He came back around and stopped beside her. "You know, sometimes people like you think the rules don't apply to them." "I believe rules are important," she said softly. "They protect both sides," he smirked. "That's one way to look at it." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees. The faint sound of another vehicle echoed far off, then faded away. "Tell me something," he said suddenly. "What's someone like you doing driving through here alone at night?" "I told you I'm going home," she replied. He tilted his head. "You don't look like someone just going home. You look like someone hiding something." "I'm not hiding anything," she said calmly. He leaned closer again, his voice low. "We'll see about that." Alicia took another slow breath. "Officer, if you want to search my car, you'll need probable cause." He stared at her for a long second, his jaw tightening again. She could tell he didn't like hearing the words probable cause. He finally stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You think you know the law better than me?" "No," she said. "But I respect it." He stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Then he let out a long breath as if trying to regain control. "You can go," he said finally, his voice low and forced. She didn't move right away. "Are you sure?" "Yes, go." She nodded, turned back to her car, and got in. This time she didn't look in the mirror. She started the engine, shifted to drive, and pulled away. As the lights behind her faded into the distance, she gripped the steering wheel tightly. The tension in her chest slowly began to ease. But she knew this wasn't over. That officer hadn't just been doing his job. He'd been testing her, pushing her to see how far she'd bend. And though she'd held her ground, she could tell by his tone, by the look in his eyes, that he wasn't done with her yet. Far down the highway, her phone buzzed with a message from her field supervisor. "Checking in. Everything okay?" She glanced at it briefly before answering with a single line. "Had an incident. Will report in person." Then she placed the phone down, her eyes focused on the road ahead. The night stretched out before her, quiet once again. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time she'd see that patrol car's lights in her mirror. Because some people, she knew, couldn't stand being wrong. And this officer, whoever he was, looked like the kind of man who couldn't let things go. The highway stretched out quiet and empty, the stars above barely visible through the thin clouds. Alicia drove slowly, her hands steady on the steering wheel, but her mind was restless. She kept glancing at the mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see those flashing lights again. The world outside looked calm, but her instincts were alert, scanning every shadow and sound. The road signs passed by, glowing softly in the headlights. She wanted to believe the encounter was over, that the officer had finally decided to leave her alone, but the uneasy feeling in her gut said otherwise. In her line of work, intuition was everything, and hers was rarely wrong. After another 10 miles, she saw the faint lights of a small gas station ahead. The building looked old, one of those lonely places that stayed open late for travelers. She decided to stop, not just for fuel, but to breathe, to collect her thoughts. She pulled in beside one of the pumps, turned off the engine, and leaned back in her seat. The silence was comforting. The clerk inside the store looked half asleep behind the counter, flipping through a newspaper. A faint hum of country music drifted from an old radio by the door. Alicia stepped out, stretching her legs. The night air felt cooler here, lighter than before. She filled her tank, then went inside for some coffee. The man behind the counter gave her a friendly nod. "Late night?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "Yeah," she said, forcing a small smile. "Heading home." He looked at her for a moment, maybe noticing how tired she seemed. "Long drive ahead?" "About an hour more," he nodded. "Road's quiet tonight. Good time to travel." "Quiet's nice," she said softly, though her mind was still replaying the officer's words from earlier. She paid for her coffee and turned to leave, but when she reached the door, she froze. Across the street, half hidden in the darkness, was a patrol car. The same one. Her fingers tightened around the cup. The car's lights were off, but she could see the faint reflection of the street lamp on the windshield. He was there, watching. She didn't move for a moment. The gas station door chimed softly as another customer entered, snapping her out of her thoughts. She walked calmly back to her car, pretending not to notice. Her steps were even, her face calm, but her pulse was racing. She got in, started the engine, and checked the mirror. The patrol car didn't move. She pulled onto the road again, her eyes fixed forward. For the next several minutes, everything seemed normal. But then, in the distance behind her, headlights appeared again, bright and steady. He was following her. Alicia's training kicked in immediately. She didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. She stayed at the limit, keeping her driving smooth. The worst thing to do was to show fear. She reached for her phone and pressed record, placing it on the dashboard where it could capture both her and the view behind her. The headlights stayed close for a while. Not too near, not too far, just close enough to remind her he was still there. Then suddenly the lights flickered. The siren chirped once, short, sharp, and cold. She sighed quietly and pulled over again. The gravel crunched under her tires. He stepped out of his car slowly, taking his time. The night was so quiet she could hear his boots scrape against the ground. "Evening again," he said when he reached her window, his voice calm but heavy with arrogance. "Officer," she said, her tone polite but tired. "You've already stopped me twice tonight. What's this about now?" "You crossed the line back there," he said. "I didn't," he gave a half smile. "You'll argue with anything, won't you?" "I just want to understand," she said. He leaned closer to her window. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm just driving home," she said quietly. He stared at her for a long moment before saying, "Step out of the vehicle again." She exhaled slowly, but obeyed. The gravel shifted beneath her shoes as she stepped out. She kept her phone recording from the dashboard. "Put your hands where I can see them," he said. "They're right here," she replied, keeping her voice calm. He started circling her again, flashlight in hand, scanning her car as if he expected something to appear out of thin air. The beam caught the reflection of her ID still clipped inside the cup holder. He paused. "What's that?" he asked. "My identification," she said. He reached inside the car without asking, picked it up and looked at it under his flashlight. His face tightened. "This says you're federal." "Yes," she said. "You didn't tell me that before." "I tried to," she said. "You didn't want to listen." He looked at the badge again, his hand tightening around it. "You could have shown this earlier," he said, his tone defensive. "I didn't think it was necessary for a traffic stop," she said. "I followed every instruction." His face went pale for a second. Then instead of apologizing or backing off, he straightened his shoulders. "How do I know this is real?" "You can call it in," she said calmly. "There's a number on the back." He hesitated. She could see the conflict in his eyes, fear mixed with pride. He didn't want to look like he'd made a mistake. He didn't want to admit that the woman he'd been harassing for the past hour had authority higher than his own. He handed the badge back slowly, his jaw clenched. "Stay here," he said. She watched him walk back to his car, pick up his radio, and start talking. His voice was lower now, less sure. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but from the look on his face, she could tell he wasn't getting the response he wanted. A few minutes later, he hung up the radio and walked back toward her. His expression had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something else, uncertainty. "You should have told me who you were from the start," he said. "I did try," she replied gently. He looked away. rubbing the back of his neck. "It's late. You can go. Is that all?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Drive safe," Alicia nodded. "Thank you, officer." She turned to get back in her car, but before she did, she noticed something. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from cold, from nerves. He knew he'd gone too far. She got into her car, closed the door, and sat there for a moment. The engine was quiet, but her thoughts were loud. She'd seen this kind of behavior before. Officers who thought their badge gave them the right to do anything. She'd investigated men like him, but living it, experiencing it personally, felt different. She reached for her phone and stopped the recording. The video was long, but it had everything. His tone, his words, his actions. Evidence. Before driving off, she sent the video to her secure FBI cloud, ensuring it was backed up. Then she started the engine and pulled away from the side of the road. As she drove, she saw his patrol car still sitting there in her mirror, the lights finally off. She could imagine what he was thinking, how one decision, one burst of ego could destroy everything he'd built in his career. But for her, it wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. People like him needed to be reminded that power came with responsibility, not entitlement. The next morning, when she arrived at her office, she filed a full report. She didn't leave anything out: the time, the location, his behavior, the repeated stops, and the recording. Her supervisor read it carefully, then looked up at her. "You handled this perfectly," he said quietly. "I just did what I was trained to do," she replied. He nodded. "We'll take it from here." Weeks passed. She didn't hear anything more about the case until one morning. She walked into the break room and saw a news headline on the TV. It was about a local officer under investigation for misconduct. Same area, same description. She didn't smile. She didn't feel satisfaction, just relief, because the system, slow as it was, had worked this time. Later that day, she drove the same route home, past the same stretch of highway. The sun was bright, the air clear. She looked at the spot where it had all happened. It looked ordinary again, just a road, just trees, just silence, but she knew better. She knew that even the quietest places could hide the loudest lessons. And as she drove on, she felt lighter. Not because she had won, but because she had stayed true. To herself, to her training, and to what was right. Somewhere in another part of the state, a man was facing the consequences of his actions. And somewhere inside her, the part that still believed in justice smiled quietly. Not every fight ends with noise. Some end with truth, and the quiet power of doing the right thing even when no one is watching. The morning light slipped through the blinds of Alicia's apartment, painting faint lines across the living room floor. It had been several weeks since that night, but the memory still played in her mind like a film she couldn't turn off. She tried to focus on her work, but deep down she knew something was building. The wheels of justice were turning, slowly but surely. Every few days she'd get a quiet update from Internal Affairs. They were reviewing the footage she had submitted, interviewing witnesses, and digging into the officer's record. She didn't ask for special treatment. She only asked that the truth be handled fairly. At first she thought about dropping it altogether. Part of her wanted to move on, to stop thinking about it, to forget how powerless that moment had made her feel. But another part of her, the part that had joined the FBI in the first place, knew better. If she didn't speak up, that officer would stop someone else, maybe someone who didn't have a badge to protect them. So she waited, patiently, quietly. One afternoon, she got a call from a woman in the Office of Professional Responsibility. The woman's voice was calm but serious. "We've reviewed your report and the video, Agent Monroe," she said. "We also obtained footage from a bystander that supports your statement." Alicia's heart tightened. "So there was another video?" "Yes, someone driving past captured part of the encounter. It confirms what you described." "Thank you," Alicia said softly. "There's more," the woman continued. "We've found multiple complaints filed against the same officer over the past 2 years. Most were dismissed for lack of evidence, but your video changes that. The Department of Justice has been notified." Alicia sat there quietly after hanging up, the phone still in her hand. The news didn't make her happy, it made her thoughtful. How many others had gone through the same thing, but without a way to prove it? The story didn't stay quiet for long. A few days later, a local reporter called her office. They'd gotten wind of the investigation. They didn't have details yet, but rumors spread fast in small towns. Soon, social media was buzzing about a federal agent exposing a bad cop. The department issued a short public statement. An officer has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. They didn't name him, but everyone in the community already knew. People began to talk, some defending the officer, others demanding accountability. But for Alicia, it wasn't about public opinion. It was about facts. Weeks passed and the investigation deepened. The FBI conducted interviews, checked the officer's service record, and reviewed his past traffic stops. The more they found, the clearer the picture became. There was a pattern, an ugly one. He had a history of pulling over drivers based on their appearance, not their actions. Alicia attended the internal hearing quietly. She didn't wear her badge that day. She dressed simply, choosing to speak not as an agent but as a citizen. When she took the stand, the room went still. She told them exactly what had happened. Every word, every look, every moment when she'd been made to feel like her voice didn't matter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just told the truth. When she finished, the room stayed silent for several seconds. Then slowly the questioning began. She answered calmly, never losing her composure. By the end of the session, even those who had come in skeptical couldn't deny what they'd seen. The evidence was undeniable. 2 weeks later, the department made it official. The officer had been terminated. He would face federal charges for misconduct and abuse of authority. The announcement was made quietly, but the impact was loud. Local news stations ran the story. National outlets picked it up soon after. Headlines read things like, "Federal agent exposes pattern of discrimination in local police department," and "Small town faces big questions after officer's misconduct case." At first, Alicia avoided interviews. She didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. But when she realized that people were listening, not just out of curiosity but out of hope, she agreed to speak once. In the interview, she sat in a simple chair, no makeup, no rehearsed lines. Just her. The reporter asked her what message she wanted to send. "I don't want this to be about punishment," she said. "It's about responsibility. Every person who wears a badge should remember that it's not a symbol of power. It's a promise to protect. When that promise is broken, it affects everyone." The video went viral. People across the country shared her words. Some called her brave. Others called her lucky. But she didn't see it that way. She saw herself as someone who did what anyone should do when they witnessed something wrong: tell the truth. At work, her colleagues treated her with quiet respect. Some came to her privately, saying her courage had inspired them to look closer at their own work. One of them, a younger agent, told her, "I joined this job to make a difference, but sometimes I forget why. Watching you reminded me." Those words meant more to her than any award could, but even as things began to settle, Alicia knew the story wasn't really over. The officer's case was still moving through the system, and the department was facing questions from the community. There were public meetings, protests, and calls for reform. It was messy, but necessary. Months later, the town police department announced new training programs focused on fairness, respect, and accountability. They invited federal oversight to help guide them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Alicia attended one of the first meetings quietly, sitting in the back row as local officers discussed changes. None of them knew she was there. She watched, listening to their ideas, their concerns, their hopes. Some were defensive. Some were open. But at least they were talking. Afterward, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange light. She stood there for a long time, just breathing it in. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her supervisor. "You did good. You reminded people why we do this." She smiled faintly, slipping the phone back into her pocket. As she walked toward her car, she thought about all the people who'd been quiet for so long, afraid to speak up. Maybe her story would help them find their voices too. Maybe they'd realize that justice doesn't always come from shouting or fighting. It often comes from standing firm and refusing to be silent. In the weeks that followed, Alicia returned to her normal routine. She traveled for new cases, worked with different teams, and spent more time with her family. Life moved on, but something inside her had changed. She carried herself differently now, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. Every time she saw a patrol car on the highway, she didn't feel fear or anger. She felt hope. Hope that the next officer behind that wheel had learned something from what had happened. One evening, months after everything had settled, she stopped at a small diner near the same highway. The waitress recognized her from the news. "You're that agent, right?" the woman asked, pouring coffee with a smile. "The one who stood up to that officer?" Alicia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, that's me." The woman's smile widened. "Thank you for what you did. My brother had a bad experience with the same guy a while back. Nobody believed him. But when your story came out, it gave us some peace." Alicia didn't know what to say at first. She just smiled softly and said, "I'm glad things are changing." "Yeah," the woman said. "Change takes time, but it starts somewhere." Alicia nodded. "It always does." When she left the diner, she looked out at the quiet stretch of road. It looked so peaceful now, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. She thought about how something so dark had led to something brighter, not just for her but for others too. She got into her car and started the engine. The road ahead was open and calm. As she drove, she felt a deep sense of peace settle inside her. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't always come quickly, but when it came, it had a way of restoring faith in people, in systems, in the idea that right could still overcome wrong. And as the lights of the highway stretched ahead of her, Alicia smiled faintly to herself. Not out of pride, but gratitude. Because she knew that even the hardest moments could become lessons, not just for one person, but for everyone watching. The story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what people chose to do when faced with injustice. About how courage, even when quiet, could change things in ways that echoed far beyond one night on an empty road. And with that thought, she drove on, steady, calm, and free. Months had passed since that night on the highway. The world had gone back to its usual rhythm, but for Alicia, everything felt different. Life moved on, yes, but with a quiet strength that followed her everywhere. The case was over, the investigation complete, and the officer had faced justice. Yet she knew the story didn't end with punishment. It ended with what people learned from it and how they chose to move forward. Alicia sat in her office one morning, sipping coffee as sunlight warmed the blinds. Her desk was piled with reports and case files, but her mind wasn't on work yet. A soft knock came at the door. Her supervisor leaned in, smiling faintly. "There's someone here to see you," he said. She looked up, curious. "Who is it?" "A young woman. Says she just wanted to thank you in person." He stepped aside, and a woman in her 20s walked in nervously, holding a small notebook. She looked shy but determined. "Agent Monroe?" she asked softly. "Yes," Alicia said, standing to greet her. "How can I help you?" The woman took a breath. "I wanted to say thank you. I saw your story online months ago. I was scared to report something that happened to me, but your story gave me the courage to do it." Alicia's heart warmed. "I'm glad you did," she said gently. "That takes strength." The woman smiled faintly. "They're actually reopening my case now. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered." Alicia felt a lump in her throat. She'd spent her whole career chasing justice for others, but moments like this reminded her why it truly mattered. It wasn't about headlines or recognition. It was about the quiet lives changed along the way. They talked for a while, sharing stories of courage and fear, and when the woman left, Alicia sat for a long time reflecting. The impact of what had happened had reached farther than she had imagined. Over the next few months, she began receiving letters, some from fellow agents, some from citizens, and even a few from police officers who said her story made them rethink how they treated people. Many were handwritten, filled with personal words of gratitude and self-reflection. One came from a retired police chief who wrote, "What you did reminded me of why I first put on the badge. We need more like you, people who stand for what's right even when it's hard." Alicia kept every letter. She never saw herself as a hero, but each message reminded her that sometimes the smallest acts of truth could start ripples that reached far beyond what you could see. One morning, she was invited to speak at a national law enforcement seminar. It wasn't something she had planned for, but her supervisor encouraged her to accept. "They need to hear your story," he said. When the day came, Alicia stood before a large room filled with officers, agents, and cadets from across the country. The stage lights were bright, but she didn't feel nervous. She began simply, her voice calm and honest. "I didn't come here to talk about blame," she said. "I came here to talk about responsibility. Every one of us in this room carries a duty to serve, to protect, and to listen. When we forget that duty, even for a moment, we lose the trust that holds our communities together. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent. What happened to me wasn't about rank or power, she continued. It was about how one moment of arrogance can undo years of trust. But it was also about how truth, handled the right way, can repair what's broken. When she finished, the audience stood and applauded. But it wasn't the applause that touched her. It was what happened afterward. Officers came up to her quietly, some shaking her hand, some thanking her, some admitting they had once made judgments they weren't proud of. One young cadet said, "Your story changed how I see the badge. It's not just authority, it's a promise." That night, as she walked out of the hall, Alicia felt a deep peace settle over her. She didn't need recognition or awards. The real victory was seeing understanding in people's eyes. As the months turned into a year, she kept working in the field, handling new cases and mentoring younger agents. But people still remembered her story. It became part of training discussions in several departments. Her video, once just evidence, became a tool for teaching officers about restraint, empathy, and professionalism. Sometimes she'd get emails from officers saying they'd watched it during orientation. One wrote, "Your experience helped me see things differently. I promise myself I'll never let pride make me forget why I wear this uniform." Alicia would smile every time she read messages like that. Change wasn't fast, but it was real. Outside of work, she spent more time with her family. Her parents had been proud but worried when they first heard what she'd gone through. Now, when they spoke about it, her mother would say, "You turned something painful into something powerful." On weekends, Alicia volunteered at a youth mentorship program. Many of the kids came from tough neighborhoods, some with deep distrust of law enforcement. She never lectured them. Instead, she listened. When they asked about her job, she spoke honestly, about the good and the bad, the challenges and the hope. One boy, no older than 15, asked her, "Do you really think people can change?" Alicia smiled gently, "I do. But it starts with honesty. Once you tell the truth about what's wrong, change becomes possible." Her words stayed with the group. A few months later, some of the older teens organized a local community talk where police officers and residents could share concerns openly. Alicia attended quietly in the back, proud to see them take that step. Her story had inspired people she'd never even met to build bridges instead of walls. Sometime later, she was invited to a university class on criminal justice. The professor asked her to speak about ethics and accountability. During the Q&A, a student raised his hand and asked, "If you could go back to that night, would you do anything differently?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "I would still do exactly what I did. Not because it was easy, but because silence helps no one. We can't fix what we don't face. Standing up for what's right doesn't always feel good at first, but it always matters." Her words drew quiet nods across the room. After class, as students came up to thank her, one young woman said, "I want to join the FBI one day." "Hearing your story makes me believe it's possible to do good from the inside." Alicia smiled. "You can. Just remember, courage doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it just means staying calm and standing firm when it would be easier to walk away." As time went on, Alicia's name faded from the news, but her story remained in the hearts of those who had learned from it. The department where it all began had transformed. The new chief publicly thanked her for helping them rebuild trust. They even invited her to their community day, where officers and residents met, laughed, and shared food in the park. When she arrived, some people recognized her and came to greet her warmly. The air was filled with laughter, music, and children running around. For the first time in a long while, the place that had once been heavy with tension felt light again. An officer she didn't know approached her and said, "I wasn't here back then, but I heard the story. I just wanted to say thank you. What you went through changed how we do things here. We're better now," Alicia smiled. "That means a lot. Keep it going." He nodded firmly. "We will." As the sun began to set, Alicia sat on a bench near the edge of the park, watching families gather and kids play. She thought about how far things had come, not just for her, but for everyone touched by the story. Sometimes life gives us moments we never ask for. Moments that test who we are and what we stand for. But how we respond to those moments can shape not just our own lives, but the world around us. For Alicia, That night on the highway had started as something dark, unfair, and painful. But it had ended as something larger, a lesson, a spark. A reminder that one act of courage can ripple farther than anyone expects. As the sky turned shades of pink and gold, she took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The past no longer weighed her down. It had become a part of her story, a story that now belonged to many. She stood, feeling the soft breeze against her face, and whispered quietly, "This is what justice feels like." Then she walked back to her car, the sound of laughter and music fading behind her. The road stretched out ahead once again, open, peaceful, and full of possibility. And as she drove off into the evening light, she knew one thing for sure. Even the smallest stand for what's right can light the way for others, long after the noise fades away.